If you're someone who's trying to lead with more clarity, make better decisions under pressure, or stop living by other people's expectations, this episode is for you.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion, my words got power, my thoughts have action. Motivation, stay gracious, that's greatness, be audacious. Motivation, be audacious. Innovation, be audacious. Inspiration, be bold. Motivation, be audacious.
In a way, often behaving differently than the expected or usual way. It doesn't mean that you're reckless or brazen or you're disrespectful to people or you're overly adventurous. You're supposed to move up to become do this and do this and do that. Well, that's living for somebody else, and that's not living for yourself. So I made some decisions early in my career to take different paths and try different things that had tremendous impact. Colin Powell, the former Secretary of State and four-star general, he has a great quote in there. Says, "You can't make someone else's choices. So why do you let someone else make yours?"
What if real audacity isn't about being reckless at all, but about having the courage to trust your own path, even when it looks different from everyone else's? This podcast is all about helping you unlock your inner greatness and live your best audacious life. And we've got Kyle Skalisky joining us on this episode. He's a former U.S. fighter pilot, aerospace exec, consultant, and the author of the book, A Sky Less Traveled. His work is rooted in leadership, resilience, purpose, and the lessons that come from operating in really some of the highest pressure environments imaginable, up in the sky and fighter. And it's just, think of Top Gun, right? Like, it's real up there. What stood out for me in this conversation was Kyle's perspective that audacity and leadership aren't about ego. They're about preparation, reflection, and having the confidence to make the choices that are truly true to who you are. So now that we've got you all set, let's get into our chat with Kyle. Enjoy. Hey, Kyle, thanks for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you for taking the time to be here, my friend.
Well, Audley, thank you for having me. I love the title, Audacious Living.
Yeah.
I wrote my book. I have a maverick life of leadership, resilience, and pursuit of purpose in the title. Mm-hmm. And I think audacious and maverick are very, very, very common terms, I think, that we'll talk about today. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they definitely are aligned with each other. And I think for me, I even sort of look at the path or the process I took to get there. And it was very much, I said I wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to do something that mattered to me, that was important to me. And I was like, what do I want to talk about? And I remember kind of doing this analysis kind of my life and looking back. And what I realized that every major accomplishment, milestone, success, victory, it came on the back of me demonstrating some form of audacity. I was doing it, but not knowing I was doing it. And it was in that process I started to go, wait a second, this thing is important. This thing does have impact. This thing does matter to people because it mattered to me. And that's kind of where it started. And I think that's a great starting point for the conversation around, what audacity is. You've got a unique, unique approach because you look at, your years flying in the sky and as a pilot and in sort of the, in the aerospace field, if you will. And within that, I can see all sorts of themes of courage and leadership and even the idea of, charting in unknown territory, if you will, or unknown parts. And so maybe as a starting point, I can get you to introduce yourself to our audience, sort of talk about the work that you do and what's got you to the point that you're now, Kyle.
Okay. Yeah. My name's Kyle Skalisky. I just recently published a book called A Sky Less Traveled, A Maverick Life of Leadership, Resilience, and the Pursuit of Purpose. That book's kind of the culmination of a long career, actually two careers, if you will. The first was 23 years as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force. I get to fly the F-15, the F-16 as an aggressor, which is, the bad guy out there training our forces. And then I did an exchange tour with our Navy and flew the FA-18 as a flight test, operational flight test pilot. enjoyed that immensely, learned a lot of lessons that then carried over into a 15-year career in the aerospace and defense industry. Worked for large corporations, the Raytheons and Mitsubishi aircrafts of the world, and then started a consulting company, which led to me being the president and CEO of a small aerospace and defense company that I just recently stepped down from to do this consulting and keynote speaking and coaching and mentoring, hopefully to pass some of these lessons that I've learned over the years to up and coming new leaders.
I mean, it's fabulous. I certainly love the way you actually embodied audacity throughout your career, right? And sort of that high stakes sort of decision making sort of framework that you're in, and certainly the insights you have on leadership and courage, they certainly align with audacity as well, right? Because you've got to step out. Taking risks is all a part of the framework. When did you sort of, or at what point did you recognize the lessons, if you will, that they were there?
Well, I mean, I think the very first in the introduction of my book, I have the definition of a maverick on there. And I say it's a person who thinks and acts in an independent way, often behaving differently than the expected or usual way. When I relate that to the audacious living and audacity that you're talking about, it doesn't mean that you're reckless or
Right,
brazen or you're
right,
disrespectful to people
right.
you're overly adventurous. But what it is about, it's about being bold and courageous and unafraid to take calculated risks, unafraid to do the things that you want to do in your life. And I think a lot of us find, and I did certainly early in my Air Force career, is that before the Air Force, growing up and what I did, I found that I was living my life to satisfy other people and
Okay.
going down a path that the corporate Air Force or the corporate company that I worked for, you're supposed to move up to do this and do this and do that. Well, that's living for somebody else, and that's not living for yourself. So I made some
Yes.
decisions early in my career to take different paths and try different things that had tremendous impact, but weren't necessarily the normal path that was expected of me. And it
Hmm.
was because it was my choice and it were the decisions that were best for my life. And so bottom line, Colin Powell, the former Secretary of State and four-star general, he has a great quote in there, says you can't make someone else's choices. So why do you let someone else make yours? And so
Mm.
I learned very early in my career that making those choices for myself and not only doing things I was good at and getting compensated fairly for them. And that
Yep.
compensation isn't always money, right?
No,
It can
no.
be travel, it can be being in the
Yep.
room with and learning and growing as a professional and a person. But then the third part that a lot of people forget is it should bring you joy. And if you're not having joy in what you're doing,
Right.
then you probably need, no matter how much you're making or how good you're at it, you probably should find something else to do. So,
Yeah.
that happened very early in my career, and that's the kind of propelled me into the path of doing some very exciting things through my life that I look back on now and have no regret.
No, no, and I'm glad to hear that. To know that you feel completely satisfied and comfortable with what you've done. To me, I think that is an element of audacious living, right? That you've
Right.
lived your life, your terms, your choices, your decisions, not knowing where the path will always go, not knowing what the end result will be, but you did it anyways. You tried anyways, and while many will look and say, "Hey, that was unconventional." It's I would debate that and say actually it's not. It wasn't like it's different from what you took, but it was my path. And that's the whole idea. We all on our own different paths. And so what I
Right.
do for me is for me and my and intended for me. And Kyle, the same is for you. And I think once we can recognize that, we will stop even comparing because that's a killer, right? Comparing what other people are doing when you've got what you've got right in
Right.
front of you.
Right. And it does no good, really, right? So you got to make your own decisions. And what that does is it builds your own self-confidence and it
Sure
brings your
does.
best self, not just to work, but to your family and to relationships that matter to you. And it doesn't matter again how good you're good at anything if you don't bring your best self to work. You're not there to bring out the best in the people that are working with you or the family that you love and that you're living with. And so Part of those decisions are just that. It's, we don't need to make decisions about work all the time because we have a more full life than that. And so everything we should do should try to look holistically at how we're doing things and how that encompasses the way we're living in the way that we want to live.
Curious, when you sort of think about your leadership philosophy, was there sort of a moment in the cockpit that sort of helped frame that for you, develop that for you?
The beauty of being a fighter pilot in the Air Force is that you're in this leadership laboratory from day one. And, there's kind of three steps in the process. One is the beauty of it is you get to learn to be a follower first. And I don't think any great leader can be a leader until they know how to follow.
Mm,
And so being a wingman very early in your career, you get to fly with these back in my day, it was these grizzled old Vietnam veteran guys that were now flying the F-15, and they had a lot of experience and they had a lot of knowledge to pass. And I knew right there then, hey, if I learn to follow and I see all these different examples of good and bad,
yep.
that will help me become better at what I do. And then once I was a follower, then I was like, okay, now how do I be the best teammate or peer or colleague that I can be, and bring my best self, like I said, to the game every day by being prepared, ready to contribute, making an impact. You don't have to be, leadership isn't a title or a
Right.
position. Anybody can be a leader at any step in the organization. And so taking on those roles, maybe that other people didn't want to take on, but showing that you're willing to step into those less glamorous positions, and doing that work, then open some eyes to the people that make the decisions on what you do. And I saw that very early in a career was something that would help you get opportunities maybe that you didn't
Yep.
always get to have. And then finally, you start with those little bit of leadership in the smaller roles. It starts leading to things that build up. And in the end, the leader isn't the best at doing everything that an
No.
organization has, right? You're
No.
not the best. You surround yourself. A good leader knows
They
how
don't,
to
and they don't need.
surround
They don't need to
themselves.
be the best, right? They don't need
Yeah,
to
you
be.
surround yourself with people and that have good character, that are very competent in what they do, and they're committed to what you and what your mission and what your vision is, and they
Right.
embody the values that you have. And that's when I noticed the best leaders. They weren't always the best at being the best fighter pilot, but they were the best at bringing out the best in their teams, so that everyone was successful.
I think that's great. I mean, you look at the role of the leaders. It is to your point, bring out the best in the people around them and let them
Right.
perform to the best of their abilities, right? And so,
Mhm.
I certainly agree with you. Something else I think is important for leaders is the importance of remaining calm under pressure, right? And there's always
Right.
going to be chaos. There's always going to be something that gets that upsets the apple cart, if you will, and you've got to be able to
Right.
respond to that. I would imagine fighter pilots train to maintain that calmness, right? Because when you're up there, anything can happen, and we know that when emotions come into play in critical situations, that's not the best recipe. So you want to be at an evil calm
Right.
level.
Yeah, and it's really a simple process, but you find what I found when I went into the corporate world that it's just not embraced as much because always something that distracts people from doing it. But for fighter pilots, you would plan, you would brief, you would execute, and then the most important part of it all is you would debrief, extensive debrief. So you understood what went right, what went wrong, not just what happened, but why it happened, and then made changes in your next planning process it's just that continuous improvement loop that everyone talks about, but you find that organizations so seldom do. But fighter pilots do that religiously so that when
Hmm.
things happen in flight that are
Yep.
abnormal or that weren't planned for,
Right. Right.
is that you had thought those through and that you had built them into your planning and your brief because you debriefed it at some point. And even though it's not part of your plan, you're ready for it because you brief abnormals and you brief things that are going to happen. So you do things not out of reaction, you do them because very calmly and very because you have a plan for it. and you're ready for that. So it's not that fighter pilots are so great off the cuff. There are some that are really good at it, but
Right, right.
it's by the fact that they're so well prepared and so well trained that they are ready to do that. And what I saw when I went to some of the organizations that I was asked to come into in the flight test world to help fix those organizations was that there was a lot of this finger pointing and blame going on
Mm,
about when things would go wrong. And the first thing I did was I said, I do it for myself as a leader, and I expect all my managers and other leaders to do it, is that you better ask yourself three questions, before you start, right, quote, assigning blame on somebody. And those
right.
questions I always asked, did your team or the individuals understand what the mission was, what the end
Mm,
state looked like, define success? This is what success is. So they clearly know what it is they're working to. Oftentimes, people just, hey, go do this, cut budget, but they don't tell you why or how much, or
right, right, right.
and then they're not satisfied with it. Well, that's on you as a leader for not giving that definition and describing what success is. The other part is, was it a realistic uh, request based on the resources that you had? Was there enough people? Did you have enough money? Did you give them enough time? If you didn't do that, that isn't on the team or the individual that failed. That's on you as a leader. And then finally, did you ask too much of that team? Did you train them? Did you give them the mentorship? Did you give them, the whatever it was, the tools that they needed to get this done? If you didn't, then that's on you as a leader.
Right.
And when you as a leader demonstrate that, and you're willing in the debriefs with your team to show that, hey, I was responsible for this and I take accountability. I'm accountable for this. When you do
Yep.
that as a leader, all of a sudden it's amazing the buy-in that you get with your team. They're like, hey, he's not trying to point blame at us. He's willing to take some of that, responsibility for what happened on himself. So maybe I'm going to be more open and willing, because it's not about retribution, it's about getting better. And then people,
Sure.
it's amazing what they want to do to share. And
Yeah.
that's what the fire pilot was all about. In the debrief, there was no rank. A general that may have flown with you is the same as a lieutenant. The flight leader, the wingman, didn't matter.
Right.
Anybody could say what they needed to say to find out what went wrong and why it went wrong, so that you can improve it. At the same time, you find out what went right
Sure. No,
so that you
I
can
really
do.
think that debrief is probably the most underestimated part of the process, right? It's easy. You go through something, okay, on to the next one, and you fly off, and you go, literally fly off. You fly off to
Yeah,
the next thing, right? And you don't give yourself that opportunity to analyze, to figure out, to learn, right? And so
right.
I think it's really important that I don't know, maybe that's just my humble opinion. I don't know. Do you, in terms of how debrief is, do you think it's something that's underestimated, or do you see, or that's not happening enough of, perhaps?
It's not happening enough of. I mean, one of the stories I write in the book is, I get to this, big corporation. I've been a leader for a while. One of the first big projects, and we go in and we do what the after action report kind of debrief,
Okay.
and out of it come all these lessons learned. Well, a few weeks later, we have another project in. We go in, and there's another after action report, and there's all these lessons learned. And then it happens a third time, and I realized, wow, these are the same lessons, quote, learned every single time. So
Right.
obviously, maybe there's lessons here, but we're not learning them
There
because
you
we
go.
keep
Do them.
repeating the mistakes. And so it was like, this is not enough just to identify it, but you got to understand why it happened and then make changes
Yes.
before you do the next one, so that you don't continue then to make those same lessons learned come up in every single meeting. So that's the whole purpose. And if big things happen, and the next time you debrief, now you're only talking about kind of medium-sized things that
Yep.
happen, to the point where now you're just solving little ticky-tack small things, then your debriefing process is working, because you got a smooth running operation.
Sure. Sure. The expression I oftentimes use is I'll say that you know, you haven't truly made a mistake unless you walk away from the experience without the lesson. Right. And
Yeah.
so the debrief gives you that opportunity to figure out and learn the lesson. If after every mission you come back and the same mistake is being made, something isn't being paid attention to. And that's what I
Right.
would.
Right. And that's the ability to embrace change too.
Hmm.
And I see that in the corporate world some. There's a resistance to change. There's people who have been in positions for years and years and years, and they're used to doing things a certain way. And change just, it's frightening to them. And the problem is change happens whether you like it or not. So you can either embrace it and grow from it, or you can just get stagnant. And when you get stagnant, it means you're falling behind in
Mm,
life, in business, and whatever it is. And then again, that's back to the audacious living. You got to be bold, and you got to be self-confident, and be able to adapt to that.
yeah.
So yeah, and that's where people talk about managers versus leaders. And I always
Yep.
say you manage when things are going well because you have good processes, things are going, but you lead when things are going wrong.
Right.
And that's when you implement the change and you do the things that you need to get back to a state where you can just manage again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's sort of talk about the idea of making sort of decisions in high pressure environments, right? Because I up there, I'm guessing you got a split second to decide quickly what your next course of action is. Are there some maybe some keys that you could suggest in sort of making effective decisions, especially at that high level when the stakes are as high as they are?
Yeah, there's a section in the book where I talk about compartmentalization. There was a study done years ago that I won't belabor, but one thing that it did point out is that fighter pilots are extremely good at compartmentalizing the task in front of them.
Okay.
What does that mean? Well, I guess it means that you have this ability to focus and have focus on the task or priority at hand, and you're able to compartmentalize or put into boxes to deal with later those things that aren't so critical or important right now. So when you're flying, obviously you're making life and death decisions often. Something could happen very quickly that could result in an aircraft crashing or someone losing their life. So you probably don't want to think about that argument you had that morning with your loved one or your sick child or something like that. Not that that isn't important, but in that moment, the ability to live in that moment that you're in right now is to compartmentalize and focus on that task. When I flew, you get into what you would call this self flow, where almost like an avatar movie where you become part of that airplane. Everything about those switches and that airplane is just an extension of you and your flight and your wingman that you're flying with. You all become one really, and you're in this flow state that is pretty amazing. And that ability to compartmentalize and focus even applies in the business world. If you go to a meeting and you're a decision maker, focus on that meeting. And I've seen too many times where very senior leaders, they got all sorts of things to worry about. So they're in a meeting that requires a certain focus, but their mind's off thinking about, the profit and loss statement or the earnings call that's going to
Right.
come out
Right.
later. Well, you can worry about that after you complete the task that's in front of you right now.
Hmm.
And so that ability to critically focus and let the distractions fall to the wayside is very important in decision making. Now, there may be things that happen that need you to refocus where you're
Sure.
going, but that's
Yep.
with experience and time, you know what the critical things are and the very important things that you need to deal with right now, the urgent things versus those that are important but not nearly as urgent. And then you can put your focus and attention. But multitasking is the worst word, or two words, I guess, in the English language, because humans are not good multitaskers. We
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
do
We
two
think
things
we
at a
are
time.
though. We think we're great at it.
We think we're great, but what we really do is we do one thing, stop, do another thing, then we go back to the other thing. But now we have to pause for a minute and remember where we were with it before we left it, when it would have been better just to finish it before you go on to the next thing. And so having that ability to compartmentalize and focus, and then when you're away from work and you're with your family, compartmentalize, focus on your family and the loved ones that you're with. Don't sit there on your phone and start
Yep.
looking at emails and messages. If that's your time, then use that time and live in that moment and do what's important in the moment.
Mm. Great advice. Great advice. I'm wondering how writing your book, as A Sky Less Traveled, I wonder how that sort of broadened or expanded your understanding of your own story.
Yeah, it wasn't until I wrote it. Well, my motivation initially is that I'm getting to be an older guy now, but I have 6 and 4-year-old boys, and that, for almost 60 years, have no idea what their father did. And I wanted to leave them something that told my
Yes.
story and what I believed in.
Oh, beautiful.
And that was kind of the motivator. But as I started to write it, I realized, you write a memoir or a book that has your philosophy in it, you learn a lot about yourself too. Maybe things that you hadn't dealt with or
You do.
or heard about. And I realized a lot of those things that then ended up being in the book, about how decisions earlier in my life were, I made what I thought were for the right purposes, but really weren't the best thing for me as an individual. They are always for somebody else's expectation, or some organization's expectation. And there's nothing wrong with considering those things. But again, if you're not bringing your best self to the game and letting people know what it is that you need to be satisfied and what you need to bring out the best in you, then you're not going to bring your best self to the game, and you're not going to help your family or your team or your company. And I think writing the book helped me learn that tremendously. It also focused me on those things that were very important to me as a follower, then, that when I became a leader, that I ensured I did, and that I wanted to get that message out. And I said, hey, there's some
Mhm.
messages here that people, I can share with people, and it might have value to them. And so that's now kind of where it's driven me to, my consulting company, Wild Sky Aerospace and Management Consulting. There's a little plug for that. But
There you go. Good job.
um, Wild Sky Consulting is my ability now to go out and pass what I've learned, and help companies, get that alignment, get the mission, vision, and value focus, learn how to build strong teams,
Hmm.
give development to their people so that people find satisfaction in the work and feel, I mean, bottom line, right? We all want to feel like we're contributing to something, usually something bigger than ourselves. And if you can create an environment like that, then you will be successful as a group and then as an individual as well. So how do you do that? And
Yes.
that's what I want to try to go out and do, is help people um, get to that kind of environment, and also, give keynote speeches to
Sure.
pass it on so groups can take the nuggets in there that may have value to them.
It's funny, as you're talking, I can see a clear, at least in my mind, and maybe I can get you to sort of comment on this and maybe identify the sort of the parallels between, like, the aerial strategy and life strategy,
Yeah.
right? But can you sort of talk
Yeah. I
about some of
mean,
those?
yeah, well, it again is very intense and focused. And I think, I have a certain intensity to me, and I think probably most fighter pilots do. And there's a lot of people that aren't fighter pilots. It's a mentality, right? So it's
Yeah.
the fighter pilot mentality, not necessarily that you were a fighter pilot. And that intensity, when focused properly, is a great asset, and it's a great motivator. I would say in that intensity, I think the best things come when you've had to work hard to get them.
Hmm.
That's the bottom line. And nothing about flying, a fighter in aerial combat or training scenarios, nothing about that is easy.
Right.
And you get good at it over time, but every day you go out there, you learn something. It's not easy. But the satisfaction that comes with doing things that aren't necessarily easy, I think, is the satisfaction that you really strive for, versus that stuff that just comes easy and it roll. You're not challenging yourself. That satisfaction isn't long lived.
Right.
So I think in life too, you should do things that challenge you,
Get
that
out of
you
the
have the
comfort zone.
self-confidence to do it, because when you
Yeah.
do achieve it, um, that success is satisfaction like you'll never get in anything else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the other one is setbacks. Things go wrong. I have a chapter that talks about, unfortunately, in my career, I saw a number of friends and colleagues I witnessed and was flying with when they, impacted the ground or impacted another aircraft, and they
Hmm.
lost their lives. And you realize that you don't know how much time you get in on this earth. Those were
Yes.
young men who were at the top of their game and thought they
Yes.
had long lives ahead of them, but in an instant it was taken away.
Hmm.
So, are you living your life right now so that if there isn't one tomorrow, that you're going to be happy with the things that you did? And you got to do the things that mattered to you. You said the things to the people that you care about that matter to you. That's a very important lesson to me. And I got that from flying. And I think that will live with me, for the rest of my life.
I love it. I love it. Um, when you think about, um, your experiences and what you've learned, what would you say is sort of the most important leadership habit that people could start practicing today?
That you don't need permission. A lot of people, young leaders, they'll talk to them and say, boy, this is a great idea. Why didn't you implement it? Well, because I didn't think I had the authority to do it, or I, had to wait till I get promoted to this next position to be able to do it. And maybe some of that is right. You might need to get permission for things, but a leader can happen at any stage in any level in an organization. I write about what we called the snack officer, or snacko, in the squadron. It was an unofficial position, but usually the most junior fighter pilot that came in the squadron. They had to keep the squadron bar stocked with,
Mhm.
beer and whiskey and sodas, and they had to have the jalapeno popcorn machine ready to go so that, at the end of the day when we all gathered to have our
Yeah, it's all
informal,
the important
yeah,
stuff.
but the snacko, it could be a great leader. And if it wasn't done right, everybody knew it. If it was done right, then, oh man, you contributed to make your team better.
Sure,
You're a
sure.
leader right there. And so you don't need a position or title to be a leader. And that's the thing, try to get to people. Managers have positions and titles. Leaders can be anywhere throughout an organization. So don't ask permission to start leading.
Let's do it.
You can lead at any level.
Do it. It's funny. I'm a basketball guy. And I remember years ago I wrote something, a piece on leadership, and it was called "You Don't Need to Be a Point Guard to Be a Leader." Right? In the
Right.
basketball game, the point guard is seen as the leader on the floor, and it makes sense because they've got the ball a lot of
Right.
times, they're directing traffic. But that doesn't mean no one else can't do anything to influence or impact the outcome of the game. So anyone can be a leader, to your point, and so I agree with that wholeheartedly. If you were to give
So on your
advice,
point, just real quick on that, like who often are the best coaches in sports? They weren't the superstar guys.
point
They were
guards,
the
yeah,
guys that were on the bench
bench,
watching, or
yes,
that guy that had kind
so
of the
true,
good career, but they were there, and some of them didn't even
so
play
true.
professional, but they turn out to be the
The
best
best
coaches
coaches. That's right. That's right.
because they see it all and they take it in and understand what it takes to put together that kind of winning
Yep.
team, from
That's right.
superstar all the way down to the last guy on the
That's right. No,
roster.
you're so right. I'm so glad you made that point because oftentimes, and then also too. So to everything you said is absolutely correct. But they also have the ability to almost relate to every position on the floor, whether you're the starter or whether you're on the bench, because they were on the bench oftentimes or
Right.
not the big contributor. And so I'm so glad you made that point. That's a good one. Last thing I want to ask you is if you were to give advice to someone who's maybe they're ready to take off and fears come in and they're not sure. Maybe they don't like turbulence or something, right? Like what do you suggest to them? What would you say?
Well, first off, fear is something we all have, and so don't try to diminish or think that fear isn't something that you should, whether it's real danger fear, obviously you should, but even fear about doing new things or taking, on new challenges or being bold in the decisions you make, that fear is okay, but don't let it paralyze you, and I try to tell people, kind of a philosophy I've lived by is that there's a lot of things that have happened in your past, and
Mhm.
some people, they can't let go of that, and it defines them for the rest of their lives. But that's in the past and you can't change it. So take the lessons that you learn from it, that whole debrief thing, but then let it go. I mean,
Yeah.
let it go. And then a lot of people, they're focused on a future that's 10, 20 years out there, and they're so focused on something that may or may not happen, with so many variables about what they can't control. And they make decisions today focused on this thing that's so far out there that really has no definition, that they forget to live right now. I mean, you need to
Yes.
have an idea where you want to go, but don't be afraid to take some detours along the way when new opportunities open themselves up to you. And those new opportunities may change your whole focus and give you, or they may just be ways to help you get back to on track
Yes.
to that
Yeah.
future you want. So to me, yeah, let go of the past, learn from it, focus on the future, but don't let it drive your decisions and live in the moment today. Make decisions in the moment today that is going to give you the best impact on whatever it is you're doing and gives you the most satisfaction and joy in what it is that you're doing. And I think that
Makes sense.
that again, compartmentalization or that ability to get into a flow state and focus on what is in front of you right now um, would help so many people, I think, if they just put their minds to it.
I love it. I love it. Like, it makes total sense, and I think it's um, something people will readily gravitate to understand. Really, what your point. So
Right.
thank you for making that, Kyle. Something we do. I'd like to do with you here. We do like what we call a fearless fast round, right? And basically rapid fire questions. You say the first thing that comes to your mind. We try to have a little fun here. And hey, since we talk about fear is there, but we got to do it anyway. So we're fearless in this fast round. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
All right, so here we go. First thing that comes to mind: window seat or aisle?
Aisle.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
bravest. Yeah, I'm curious. Why the aisle? I'm curious.
Why the aisle? Well, I don't know. I feel like I can get up easier.
Okay, okay,
And as
okay.
I get older, maybe to use the restroom more frequently. I don't know, but
Fair enough.
I feel like I have more control when I'm in the aisle, you
Fair enough.
know.
Very,
I'd
very,
really like to be up in the front in the cockpit,
oh, there you
but
go.
because I like flying myself around, but I don't like other people flying me around. So
When you get on a plane, do you kind of peek your head and say, "Hey guys, what's happening?" Do you do that a little bit?
yeah, I do.
Love it. Love it.
I know a lot
Um,
of those guys, so I do see some that I
oh,
know now and
oh,
then.
there you go. There you go. There you go. I love it. The bravest thing you've ever done.
The what?
The bravest thing you've ever done.
Really, it's nothing to do with about flying airplanes and all the crazy things that I've done, but I think it was meeting and knowing that my wife, who's I met when I was 49 years old, and I dedicate the book to, she is a 29-year-old physician, and the fact that I sat next to her in an airplane and said, "Man, I really want to get to know this woman, and I don't care what the age difference is here. I want to get to know
Beautiful.
her." And I got to know her, and now have two wonderful children,
Beautiful.
and approaching our 12th wedding anniversary. So I think it was the
Beautiful.
bravest thing I did was to approach a woman who's probably many levels above where I am.
And I'm sure she'd say differently, I bet. That was beautiful. What one word that defines great leadership?
Service.
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Leaders serve their teams. Leaders
Yeah.
serve the mission that they're in. Leadership isn't about the individual. It's about who you're trying to guide and who you're trying to help to accomplish great things.
Your go-to ritual before a high stakes moment.
I would say meditation,
Okay. I like that.
the
I like that.
ability to pause and just clear your mind of all those distractions that are around you, and then put yourself into that box, into that compartment,
hmm
and start that focus and realization of what it is that's in front of you right now.
Can you identify a fear that you had to outgrow?
A probably an irrational one, the fear of that I would be seen as failure by other people.
Hmm.
Um, and again, that became part of my self-realization is that I don't need other people, to justify my success. That's something that I have to live with myself. But always, that early on trying to do things to make other people happy.
Got you. Got you.
Yeah.
The toughest lesson the sky ever taught you.
The toughest lesson. Yeah, leading a 50 aircraft strike package is not an easy task, and you can't do it yourself. But no, I think the biggest thing is that even though I flew, behind me there an F-15, an F-18, the
Mhm.
F-16, they're all single seat fighter airplanes. So
Yeah.
you would think, oh, I'm just out there all by myself, but it's not. You're never solo. when you're flying, and truly in life, I think that applies as well. So I would say you're never truly, not one word, but you're never truly solo, even when you think you're by yourself. You have your wingman, you have the greater structure that's supporting you, those who
Yep.
you stood on to get to where you're going. It's not about being alone.
Got you. Which comes first in your mind, purpose or passion?
I think passion is what starts most people. But without purpose, which to me, purpose is focus on mission, that vision and values, then you're never going to succeed. So they're kind of hand in hand, but
Yeah.
usually it starts with passion.
Okay.
But then the purpose needs to come very quickly to follow. And I think that's where a lot of organizations and people fail, is they have the passion, but then they fail to put it into a purpose, and defining what that mission is and what that success looks like. And so they have a lot of passion and they motivate a lot of people, but they don't have a good
Purpose.
process or purpose to get to where they're going.
Got you. Got you. Last one here, Kyle. We're going to close off strong here. What does living audaciously mean to you?
Well, like I defined at the beginning of my book, it's living that maverick life, and doing things by being bold, by being courageous in what you do, unafraid to take some risk, not to be not to be brazen, like I said, or overly adventurous to the point where you're going to hurt yourself or others, but the ability to be self-confident enough to make your own decisions. So that's to me what living audaciously is. You'll have setbacks along the way, but because you believe in what you're doing, and it's the choices that you made, you develop this resilience to be able to bounce back and then just keep pressing. And to me, that's audacious living. It's, there's those stories about, I can get knocked down. That's okay. But it's about getting back up and keeping going. That's the important part. People who fail, they're not failures. They're just people who failed, like we all do. And success is fleeting. Success comes, but then what? You got to have that thing that just keeps you moving along. And I think that's what living audaciously is.
Kyle, this has been awesome. I really do appreciate you spending time here and chatting. I've had a lot of fun with you, and but I also can clearly see that the sky has been so important to you in your life and the lessons that you take from it, but the cool thing, and what I love what you've done is the lessons didn't just stay with you. It's now what you do with them and how you pass them on, and how you use those to help others. It's literally what you've created is literally shortening the learning curve for other people, and it's a fabulous thing. Congratulations on that. For listeners that want to connect with you directly or learn more about your work, where can we send them?
Well, my company's website, Wild Sky Aerospace and Management Consulting, is wildsky-consulting.com.
Okay.
Wild is WYLDSKY, so wildsky.com, consulting.com. And then also on Amazon Books, A Sky Less Traveled, A Maverick Life of Leadership, Resilience, and the Pursuit of Purpose is available there. I'd love for people to read the book, and it's all about debrief and feedback. So I'd love reviews and for people to let me know what they liked or didn't like, and messages that resonated, so that I know where to focus.
So we will make sure that we put all the all the details of show notes below. And encourage our listeners to connect to you directly. Again, Kyle, this has been fantastic. Thank you for the time, and I appreciate you for being a guest on the Audacious Living Podcast.
Audley, thank you very much. You're the greatest.
Thank you. All right, welcome back. And I've got to say that moment when Kyle explained why he prefers the aisle seat definitely made me smile a little bit. And I'm with you all the way. There's no doubt about that. But beyond that, this conversation is such a powerful reminder that leadership is not about pretending to have all the answers. It's about being prepared, staying calm under pressure, learning from what didn't work, and having the courage to choose a path that's actually right for you. What stayed with me was Kyle's point that so many people end up living according to the expectations that were never really theirs to begin with. And when you do that long enough, you can lose sight of your own purpose. And that's a trap that so many people fall into. But here's the thing, when you take the time to reflect, to debrief, to learn, and to make intentional decisions, you start building a life and leadership style that actually fits who you are. Sometimes the boldest moves is stepping away from what no longer fits you. It's time for an audacious insight where we take a quick look at something happening in the real world that reflects the power of bold thinking and intentional action. Now, when Jeff Bezos stepped down as CEO of Amazon after building it into one of the most dominant companies in the world, it wasn't because he couldn't continue. It was because he chose to focus on new areas like innovation, space exploration, and long-term impact through Blue Origin. He walked away from a role most people would hold on to forever, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Growth sometimes requires you to release what's successful so you can step into what's meaningful. Now, I want to encourage you to connect with Kyle directly. He's doing great work through his consulting and speaking efforts, and his book, of course, is A Sky Less Travel. It's definitely worth checking out. We'll make sure, of course, the links are in the show notes below so you can connect with him directly. And hey, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Follow the podcast and leave a review so more people can discover these conversations. Thanks so much for joining us. And as always, until next time, live life audaciously.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion. My words got power, my thoughts have action. Motivation, stay